Hey guys, welcome to Hope It Helps. And my guest on the show today is Mr. Talal Al Nawab. Talal, welcome to the show, man.
Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, bro. Thank you. So, Talal, I've heard a lot about you from not only my sister, but from my mother as well. And she told me about the work that you do, which is basically, you have like an education kind of platform helping students not only with tutoring, but with like SATs and but primarily getting into universities and stuff. So
Yeah.
I thought, now, given where we are right now, given what time of year it is, and I haven't had someone on the podcast who actually is focused on that kind of stuff. So I thought it'd be really interesting because I think back to when I was younger and I never knew what like university was looking for. I didn't know what I had to put on my application. I knew nothing. So I'd love to get into all these different things today. But before we get into everything, Matt, why don't you give all of us a little bit of background about yourself and we'll take it from there.
All right, yeah, I'll start from the beginning, I guess.
Yes, sir.
So I am Iraqi by origin.
All right.
But I was born in London. I lived there until I was 11. Came to Dubai with my family in 2002. Good old days, 20 years ago. Which feels like a long time ago now.
Yeah,
and I was in high school here. I went to Dubai College.
Okay.
I did GCSEs and A levels, so I continued the English curriculum. And then, I basically had an interesting university application period, which I guess also is one of the reasons, I guess, why I'm in the education field now. So I applied initially for, a set of unis applying for economics, actually.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And so I applied only to the UK in my initial application round when I was finishing school.
Yeah.
And then I basically ended up it didn't go to plan really. I didn't get into the schools I wanted to. And I was always a pretty good student. I worked quite hard and I had certain ambitions. I didn't really give much thought to the process. Didn't think about my options.
Yeah.
And then I basically took a gap year and reapplied. And I actually worked with a counselor myself, university counselor who opened the doors up for me to the US.
Okay, nice.
Told me about the US as well as the UK. So I applied dual track the next year.
Okay.
US and UK. So I spread my options, which is important in this game if you can plan ahead.
Yeah, for sure.
And obviously if you have the means to apply to both, and so reapplied, and it was a different story the next. That next season, next application round. I put in more thought into my applications, worked on them harder, made sure I was in a good position with my exams, etc. And then I reapplied, did a gap year, and that time I managed to get into some pretty good schools in both the US and the UK.
Nice.
And I had a choice on my hands between either going to the UK to study in Cambridge or going to the US to study in Stanford. So I had a couple of some good options. It was a nice dilemma to have. I was very grateful for it. And then I decided in the end, to go to the UK.
Okay.
Obviously, I grew up there. I think it was
more familiar too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Family was happy with me being there as well. So I think at that time it made more sense. And obviously, as alluring as California was, I do think sometimes what would it have been like if I'd gone to Stanford. Obviously, much further away. It's a different education system, which we'll perhaps talk about later. But and then so I went to Cambridge, did 4 years of engineering. I'd applied for engineering, graduated with my master's degree in 2014.
Okay.
And then I started. So my work journey has also been quite varied and dynamic. And so I started in business consulting, working with Deloitte in London. I started my career in London.
Okay.
I moved to London. I wanted to start things there. And then, I basically, I was working consulting for 2 years. And then I decided I wanted to change things up. I didn't really I didn't enjoy working so much for a corporate or for a big company.
Okay.
I wanted to try working for a smaller company, perhaps change industry as well. I wasn't feeling too super engaged with the work. And that's when I basically had a bit of a career brainstorm and came up with the idea of potentially working in education. So I spoke to my former counselor, the guy I worked with, got his opinion on the industry. He was still working in the industry, and he'd had about 4 or 5 years more experience under his belt. So we talked about it, and I happened to have a friend who was also getting into the industry at the time.
Okay.
Funnily enough.
Yeah.
So I started working with that guy who was in London, and I worked for under his company, which was a small outfit, only a few people full time. And I was there, so I was initially just a trial period, ended up being 2 years. So I worked with them for 2 years. That's how I kind of got to know the industry, learned the ropes. basically.
Yeah.
You know, I did tutoring. I did tutoring, SAT, ACT. I did some subject tutoring, and then I also worked on the university admissions counseling side. So
Yeah.
primarily for the US and the UK, because I'd had the dual track. I had some experience with it anyway, and they could, you know, they basically trained me up as well. You know, gave me some students to work with, and obviously I built from there. And after 2 years of learning the ropes with them, I decided to set up my own company.
Yeah.
You know, doing similar work, primarily focused again on the UK and the US, given the experience I'd had.
Makes sense.
And I set that up this is now 3 years ago.
3 years, okay.
And that was, it was an interesting period. But obviously with COVID then hit about 7-8 months later.
True, yeah.
About a year later. So that was an interesting period. But yeah, so I've been doing it for 3 years under my own brand, Integra Education. And I've got a couple of colleagues who work with me now as well on the test prep and tutoring side.
Okay, gotcha.
And I'm more and more primarily handling the university admissions counseling side and the kind of mentorship side.
Yeah.
So working with students and helping them, you know, on that journey to university. It's all part of the same bigger picture.
Exactly.
Obviously.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to focus a bit more on that work, and obviously talking to clients and speaking to families, and you know, so yeah, and that brings us, I guess, to where we are now. So. And here we are in 2022. So, yeah.
Sounds like it's a very interesting journey to go engineering and then go consulting and then end up, you know, in education. It's just stories like yours and stories like mine, for example. So I did a double major in economics and finance. I have not worked one day in either finance or economics.
Right.
I worked in sales for a while, and now here I am with the podcast and some other work that I do. So it's just interesting that when you're younger, like now going into university, it feels like you want to have an idea of where you want to go. But I think if we look, both of us looking back in hindsight, do you think now, looking at where you are now and like the students you work with, is it like a must or is it a priority for you to have a very clear vision of where you want to go? Because in both our examples, we went down one road and ended up completely in the other side. So what are your thoughts like around that when I guess you're talking to students and trying to like help them figure out what they want to do and what they're passionate about?
Yeah, very good question. It's the short answer is it's not an easy problem, right? To face. I mean, you know, students are, when I'm working with them, they're young. Even if they're in high school, they're only 15, 16, 17, 18, you know, maximum 18. But if they're anywhere from year 10 to year 12, when I tend to work with them in the year 10 to year 12 or grade 9 to grade 11, if we're talking about the US system, those last, 3-4 years, they're still very young.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, there's still not enough of a focus on careers in schools.
Yeah, for
right?
sure, yeah.
I think, schools are primarily focused on exam achievement.
Yeah.
And doing well in, GCSE, A-level IB, whatever you're doing, American high school curriculum. They want to have, students to have good grades. And that's obviously one of their leading benchmarks. One of their KPIs, right?
Right, yeah,
what they're measured
sure.
against.
Yeah.
And there's a big focus on that. And I think that's not necessarily, I don't think that's something. It's something to think about. I think it's something to measure yourself against. But I think there's sometimes too much of a focus on that. And they don't look at the bigger picture. End of the day, you're trying to prepare, well, in my opinion at least, you're trying to prepare these students for later life, really.
Exactly,
right? You're trying to help them, really, to me, the most important thing is trying to help them discover something which they're passionate about, they care about, they want to spend most of their life doing, or they're happy to spend most of their life doing once they leave school, go into university, and then it's almost like a funnel towards finding some sort of purpose and sense of
your why, basically. Like what? Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's I don't feel like the current schooling system necessarily does that. And there's an interesting interesting theories on this, and there's actually a TED talk which I've sent to some people recently, which a friend of mine showed me, by a guy called Sir Ken Robinson.
Okay.
And the title, I think, of the TED talk is "Do Schools Kill Creativity?"
Oh, I've seen that.
Have you seen it?
Yeah. A while ago. Yeah.
It's one of the most viewed TED talks. I think it's got 65 million views or something.
That's why. Yeah, it makes sense.
He actually recently passed away, sadly, but he was a guy who was trying to promote like arts education within schools, and basically talking about how most curricula in the world deprioritize arts subjects, for
True.
example.
Yeah,
right?
they do.
Music,
Yeah.
art itself,
That
drama.
that creativity side, right?
Creativity side, yeah. They tend to stifle or almost stigmatize it in a way that they do not promote it so much.
Sure.
Instead, the focus is on STEM, science, maths, English as well, of course. These are like the big focus areas. And then you've got the social sciences, the humanities, and then at the bottom of the pecking order is the arts, as you were saying. And it's right. That means that you're not exposing, that to me is automatic, shows you that, we're not exposing necessarily students to enough of a broad enough range of areas.
Exactly. To think about or to consider.
Exactly. 100%. I've got a passion for music, for example.
There you go.
I've done some music production in the past. It's a pretty serious hobby of mine. And that was never something I really got to I ever really considered, because it was never something I took seriously, because I don't think I was, primed to take it seriously.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that in itself is very interesting. So going back to what you were saying about, having that vision, I think it is important for students to think about it more.
Yes, that's fair. That's
right?
fair.
To think about it more. I don't think you have to have the answer from a young age necessarily. My job, one of my jobs as a counselor, is to try and help students explore, get enthusiastic about exploring different career paths.
Yeah.
Doing summer programs, using their summertime wisely, exploring different subjects at school, thinking about their curricula a bit more closely. Which subjects am I going to do at GCSE, A level, or IB? And you have, some good choices often available at schools, and really getting them to think for themselves rather than thinking about what are my classmates doing, what do my parents want me to do. Like try and think more for yourself, because when you get into career, and you probably know this as well yourself now, as a working person, what's going to sustain you is your passion for what you're doing. True. Not the expectations of other people, because that's what's going to supersede all of that immediately. Is what are you passionate about? What do you feel? What do you feel enthusiastic? What's going to get you up in the morning?
Exactly.
What's going to keep you working till a certain time to push yourself? And hopefully, I think most people want to achieve things in their life. What's going to get you achieving things and doing stuff for your own, out of your own volition. So I think it's important for students to think about, having that vision, or experimenting with different things to try and come up with some sort of an understanding of what they're passionate about, what they're interested in. And hopefully when it comes to university, picking a degree that they actually find interesting, fulfilling, and hopefully being able to really leverage that degree as much as possible. You can still change careers and stuff. It's not like you're fixed, but you've given it the thought, so you don't look back and you think to yourself, you know what, I really could have thought about that some more, And you're just making your life that much smoother and that much more, fulfilling at each stage.
Yeah, I think so.
And that's a big part of the driving force of my work, for example, and the work of other people, I guess, in my field. I really think it's not just about me helping students with applications to university, which of course I do, but what do what's the bigger picture?
Exactly.
And working with students from a young enough age is also important for that, I think.
Yeah, I think you made a good point, and this is one of the questions I had for you, and you correctly said there isn't enough of an emphasis on career when it comes to schooling, and it doesn't have to be from the beginning, but particularly in those years. And from all the stuff I've read on your website, for example, the key thing that seems to stand out is the earlier you start thinking and planning, the better results you can expect to have, and the better execution you're going to have, right?
Yeah.
But I remember when I was 15, 16, 17, 18, and the work you do, I can't, you would know better, because you're talking to these students all the time and they're in that age. But when I was 15, 16, bro, I was my head was nowhere near, anything like thinking about a future. In my head, I'm I want to do engineering, but that's it. I had more important priorities. I was like, what are my friends doing? Oh, there's girls, or there's this, you know what I mean? It's so, so for me to, for a 15 to 18-year-old to sit down and have the mindset to be you know what, I genuinely want to think about what I want to do, must be quite challenging for them to get there, and challenging for you as the counselor to communicate with them in a way that makes it, in quotation marks, cool, or I can resonate with that, or some way for me to connect with that.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the big challenges. and you're right. Our students are as we were when we were younger.
Yeah, exactly.
You have other things you're thinking about. What are my friends doing? And yeah, that's not. And that also feeds back to the point I mentioned about the school really getting you to think about this, because the school, you spend so much time in school.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and that's your job is student. It's like my dad always used to say, "What's your job? You're student. You have a job. It's student. So they do have jobs, and that's their work, so to speak. They're learning.
Exactly.
But they should take that seriously. And I think that's the thing there. It's just taking it seriously, and being able to have that, getting them enthusiastic about it. And it's the ecosystem. If you have good teachers, if you have good counselors, if you have good careers guidance, if you have, and this is obviously the big challenge really, then you're going to have students who are going to take this more seriously. You're going to have students who are going to think about this more. The problem is they're not made to think about it.
You hit it on the head. Yeah.
And that's the thing. If you make them think about it, they will think about it. Even if, okay, they have the time to do their fun, and we'll need our time off and have fun with their friends, but they can still use that time in school, for example, and outside school to give it some more thought. And it doesn't have to dominate their life, of course, but it's a little bit of time from an early age makes a huge difference later on.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It can make a huge impact on your life. And that gentleman, Sir Ken Robinson, he was saying, one of the stories he said in the TED Talk was, which I found very powerful, was he mentioned about how there was the story of a lady who ended up becoming a top I think it was ballet or dance teacher / business lady within the dance world. She worked on like Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals and Phantom of the Opera. She basically was like a kid who was thought to be someone who had maybe ADD or wasn't able to focus in class, but it turns out that she had a passion for dance, and a doctor that was meant to kind of diagnose her for whatever problems she may have had or whatever actually told her mom that she's a dancer. She's passionate about dance. You should take her to a dance school. Lo and behold, the mother listened, and thankfully that doctor was clearly a special man. Who was able to really realize that, rather than prescribing some medication or something.
Exactly.
And that so that just shows you small little things like that. You have the right people, the right ecosystem around you, and that changed their life forever. And working with young people, they are adaptable. Their thinking is generally more flexible. They're more able to be influenced, hopefully positively.
Exactly, yeah. For sure.
And they'll look up to people who have been through experience, and they'll be able to take on advice and hopefully be able to be steered in the right direction.
Yeah.
And so I think there is something to be done. But you're right. I mean, that is ultimately the kind of status quo is there's not a natural inclination or curiosity for that, not because of them, but because of the ecosystem around them.
I think you really hit the nail on the head when you talk about ecosystem, because like you said, if, for example, in school, the norm was in every school all over the world, the norm was like from grade 9, let's say 9th grade onwards, you have a couple of years left, so you're going to university, that is a conversation that you have on an ongoing basis year by year. It becomes normal. It becomes I can see it becoming a conversation started with my friends, like, oh, what are you thinking about? What am I thinking about? Do you know what I mean? So like you said, you're giving it the spark to start having these kind of conversations, so that when someone like yourself comes in, for example, out of nowhere, and you're asking me all these questions, I'm like, bro, I've never even thought about anything you're talking about. So like now, so how am I supposed to like get my head around it?
There's a bit of there's something there at least where you're already having building it into that.
Yeah.
Building it into the system.
Yeah.
Basically.
And I can imagine with the work you do that many students come to you. I'm gonna guess, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. They come to you in the last year, probably, right? It's like, okay, now it's time for university. Okay, we need some help. We need to get to a counselor. And one thing you said, I've never, again, like we've been talking about, but I've never thought about my future. I've never thought about my career. I've never thought about university. And one thing you said was that universities look for that make students stand out is that narrative, that story, and like their admissions essay, for example, that hook, the hook, as you call it.
Sure.
So if I've never thought about any of these things, and now here we are, it's grade 12, I'm going to uni next year, I've never thought about any of these things, I'm sitting with you, Talal, I'm like, okay, now, like, what do I do? How do I accelerate finding what that hook is?
So it's sometimes not easy because that's the whole point. You've come at it quite late.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that I mean, at that stage, because of course, yeah, as you said, a lot of families do come to me when the student is in year 13 or the last year of high school, and it's like September, October. Applications are in November, October, and panic mode. Hey, help! Can you help? Can you help? And of course, I can help. And of course, I work with those families a lot, but. It makes what it means is that the student's story is set, and it's a case of how do you present the story.
Okay.
Right. How do you present that story?
Yeah.
How do you take the achievements and experiences of the student, the CV of the student, let's say, the student's resume, and how do you present that in the best way? And oftentimes there's things that students haven't even thought about. Oh, I've had that experience where I went through this difficult period in my life and I overcame it, and it's like, oh well, we can talk about that in your essays. In the US, they really care about these kinds of personal stories. In the UK, it's more academically focused, right? But it's more degree focused. But in the US, they care about these personal stories, and you'd be surprised the stuff that someone has, a story they might have, which is quite powerful, which they don't even think about. So it's about teasing it out of them as the counselor, and getting all the information from them. Then from there, helping them craft, a certain narrative or the hook, as you've called it, which is something that's going to get the admissions teams to look at and be like, oh,
yeah, let's take a look at this.
Let's take a look. This is an interesting student. Because you're obviously, the competition that you're facing. So you really want to tell a story that's personal. That's this is for the US particularly. That's personal. That's it's engaging. That's interesting. That's real. End of the day,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And how you tell that narrative is very important, and that's a big part of the work at that stage. That's the application time.
Gotcha.
So there is, of course, and oftentimes, like I said, students do tend to have things that they've done and things they've gone through that can be very powerful stories and very powerful tales. And it's about getting that through.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting that across. At that late stage.
Yeah.
So it's but yeah, it is. It can be. It's an interesting period to come. But as you said, a lot of families, parents as well, just don't think about this stuff
in advance
until early enough. They don't. Exactly, they think to themselves, okay, now we're in final year. Okay, it's application time. Okay,
now we need the help.
Exactly. Now we need to think about this properly.
Exactly.
Whereas, and there are some families out there which actually are very proactive, and to come to me when their son or daughter is in year 10.
Oh wow! Okay.
Year 9 sometimes. Even earlier sometimes. But generally speaking, there's some of them will come in when they're in year 10, year 11. Still got 2 more years to go, for example, and it's like, okay, now you can really plan ahead and really, I can work with the student on a longer term basis and really help them steer themselves, and it doesn't need to be a rush necessarily. And so it's, it can make a big difference.
Exactly.
So, but those are the families that generally tend to be a bit more proactive about it and really want to, are thinking about their son or daughter's education, and it could come from the student sometimes. If it's a very proactive student, sometimes they are the ones driving
who'll seek that out.
I mean, I've had students come. I've had conversations with students in the first instance. The parents aren't even there. It's like I'm talking to the student, and the student's like, so how can you help me with this? And I'm like, it's great, because rarity. It's and it shouldn't be the case, but it's not the usual. But you will get those very proactive, ambitious students who realize that they could do with some support, some good guidance, and they'll reach out. Because maybe they've seen my company, or they've heard about me through their friend who told them in school, a classmate, and they'll reach out to me. They won't even tell their parents.
It's like, let me talk to them.
Let me talk to them. That's great. It's amazing. End of the day, my ultimate client really is the student, right? I'm working with the student. But of course, the family relationship is very important as well, and the parents should always be there and involved, if possible, to help steer things and keep a tab on things. But the student is the one that I'm ultimately working directly with.
Yeah. Have you seen? So you've been in the field for about like a couple of years now, but 2 years alone and then 3 years now yourself.
Yeah.
So let's focus on this first. So in the example that you just gave, a student that has come to you or a family that has come to you, they're proactive, year 10, whatever, we're working together now for the next 2-3 years until I graduate and go to university. And the other side, which is the ones that have come,
final year.
Final year, like 2 months out, I need your help, admissions and so on. From your perspective, have you seen a difference in, I guess, success rate or results, or how would you compare the two differences from like for yourself and having that experience and having this experience? Obviously, I'm guessing you prefer the longer one because you get to build that relationship with the student. You can guide them better. There's more time. It makes sense. But how would you compare the two from your perspective now? Like if you look back.
Well, a big question there is, how do you define success, right?
True.
So how do you define? It's for me, it's not about how many students got into Harvard,
Okay.
because Harvard is not necessarily the best place for for a lot of students. It's about, for me, I would say I would measure the success by the ability to get the student into the best fit university for them.
Best fit.
The best fit, and that's very important. That's really what this is all about. The right degree, because the right degree, the right university. Because you could go to Cambridge and do engineering, for example, or you could go into Oxford and do whatever, or LSE and do whatever. But these are the top universities in the UK, for example. But you might be doing something you don't like. You might be doing something you really aren't passionate. You might drop out. You struggle for 3 years to get through it and really chore. And versus someone who's just to give. I mean, this is a random example, but someone who goes to a university that's less highly reputed, but is doing a course that they actually love. Like maybe they're at the London College of Fashion, or they're doing architecture at a great university that specializes in architecture, like RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. A lot of people haven't heard of that university. It's one of the best architecture schools in the US, and they might be a lot happier. But people will look at it from the outside and think, yeah, but hold on a sec, but that student got into Cambridge, and that student got into Rhode Island School of Design. Surely Cambridge is the better university, so that's the most successful outcome for you. And I would say it really depends. It really depends on the on how satisfied the student is with that decision, and how much they've given it some bit of thought, and they've really it's an informed decision rather than, hey, I just want to go to that university because it's the best university, and other people are telling me to apply there. And so how do you define the success? And I think the success is always greater if you look at it from that perspective of best fit, when I've worked with them over a longer time period. When I'm working with them in a shorter time period, my job is to try and achieve that, but in a condensed period, which obviously is more difficult. But that's what I'm always thinking about. It's how do I get them into the best fit universities for what they want to do? And that's a big, that's the way I always position it. Yeah, basically.
I think you made a good point about, again, hitting it on the head about a lot of people. I think I'm gonna assume most people or parents or students, you want to go, where do you want to go to university? You want to go to the big boys. You want to go to the Harvards, the Stanfords, the Cambridges, like all that shit, like you were talking about. And then comes the question, okay, is this the best fit or not? So the work you do, like even talking to you, is very interesting because you're in a very unique position, and there's so many different factors you have to consider. So I was thinking about this. I'm like, when it comes to applying for universities or working with a student, you have 3 perspectives that you've got to manage. You've got to manage the student's perspective, you got to manage yours and the universities, and you have to manage the parents. And there's times, I'm guessing, where those 3 definitely don't align. So
yes,
I can see the smile.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess, is it when you're dealing with, let's say I'm a student, I want to go to the top university, my parents want me to go to this top university, whether I have the credentials or not, but I just want to apply there because, again, it's a reputable university. What are you like? You can help and try, but you're also, this world, so you're realistic. So do you have to sometimes just give a hard no, like, guys, it will not happen. Like, this will not happen. It's not in a negative way, just on 1, 2, 3 requirements, or 1, 2, 3 things I know, whether fit culturally, whatever, fine, but maybe academically it doesn't fit. There's so many angles that you have to take into consideration.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. 100%. Yes, it can be. There can be some conversations that need to happen. Sometimes the earlier the better. Getting expectation setting is very important.
Key,
in this.
For sure.
Yeah. In a lot of things it is, right? But in this, definitely, because as you said, you have the perspective of the parent, you have the perspective of the student, and yes, you have my perspective as the counselor and my advice. and ultimately I'm being hired to advise. I'm an advisor, right? I'm giving advice really to the student and the parents. And so there is often, not always, but there is often a clash between, let's say, student and parent.
Yeah.
You know, my parents want me to apply here, but the student will tell you know, I don't really want to go there. But and it's sometimes you have to find, it's compromise often. You know, it's like you've got to find a bit of, okay,
you can take this one, maybe
exactly.
Not, yeah,
You know,
okay.
apply to that school because you know your parents really want you to apply. And even though it's not necessarily what you know maybe necessarily want to apply for, it could be a great university.
Yeah.
So you know if you do get in, great. But you know you have to sometimes find some compromises.
Sure.
And I think it's you know what are the fair compromises to make basically. But that is definitely a challenge. But just being honest, being as transparent as possible with you know, as I said, the expectations and where the student, you know, what are the student's interests, you know, what's their academic achievement level, you know, and where is, as you said, where is realistic and where is, as we said, the best fit really. And that's something which, yeah, with some situations it can be trickier than others. With some families it can be trickier than others.
For sure.
I think the best situations are, you know, are where you have, you know, parents who are, their number one focus is on making sure that their you know their kid is happy, is doing it for them.
Yeah.
Not for them I mean for themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Not for the
yeah,
parents.
not for the parents. Yeah.
Yeah. Doing it for themselves and giving them that independence to really think on their own 2 feet, which is you know something that'll you know a lot of kids don't get that luxury at that age, but it's something which you know they should be starting to give them, I think, some of that, and being able to make their own decisions, so that when they do leave for university, they've made those choices independently, and they've made the choice of which universities to apply to, with where they feel like they're very involved in the process, and they're really leading the process. To be honest, that's what I always want to try and do, is make sure the student is leading the process, because they are. I always tell them, you know, you're going there for 3 or 4 years, not me.
Yeah.
Not your parents.
Exactly.
You know, you're going to be out there on your own. We're not going to be there with you to hold your hand. So, you know giving people, you know, giving young people those reminders can often also, you know, spark
something, right?
Something. Yeah. Oh, you're right. It is, you know, that's true, you know? And so and that helps them think on, you know, makes them think on their own feet and really, and again, care about it. Right. But yeah, the expectation setting, going back to your question, you know, the expectation setting is very important, and having those conversations from early on is important.
Where have you found, I guess, the bigger challenge? Is it usually when it comes to like this topic, for example, of applying to universities and where to apply? Is it convincing the students to go for a certain route based on, you know, what makes sense for them, or convincing the parents? Because I don't know which one it would be. I think both are equally hard, but I would say at the end of the day, buck falls with the parents. So I think that's where the battle has to be won first.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Generally speaking, probably the parents, because I think the students are generally more adaptable in their thinking. And they know they're young and they don't have so many formed opinions yet.
Yeah,
you know,
they're
looking to you.
I like how you phrase that, formed opinions.
Formed opinions. Yeah, they're looking to you to give them, you know, the guidance, really,
exactly,
right, as their counselor. Whereas sometimes I guess the parents, you know, they may have their own thoughts on certain universities or certain degrees that they feel less enthusiastic about. Or they feel really enthusiastic about, you know, and they really want to make sure they do that, make sure they apply to there. Yeah. And that's, you know, talking to them and having a more balanced conversation.
Yeah.
And thinking about things holistically it can sometimes be challenging. But I think generally speaking, you know, oftentimes it's about how you communicate with people, you know, how you describe the pros and the cons, how you take them through the whole situation. Most people will listen to reason. Yeah. And if you communicate with them in an effective way, they and you have obviously reasons for saying what you're saying, they will often, and they know ultimately they're hiring you because you're the expert. They will generally, you know, the parents will also take your guidance on board. And they will generally, you know, strongly consider it at the least. So I think it probably is a bit harder with the parents sometimes, but it's still, I've managed, I think, to try and, you know, to basically navigate that and manage the relationships as well as I can. I think it generally has been good.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, like you said, at the end of the day, it all does come down to the relationship you have, not only with the student, but with, the family and that unit, together.
100%. And again, if you've worked with them for a longer period, then of course you've built that relationship, and the trust
and
is
the
there.
Trust, exactly.
They know what you're talking about, and you have the right, ultimately you have the kid's interest at heart, and if they know that for a fact, then they're much more likely to, go with what you say,
exactly,
and believe what you say. So that again, that makes it easier.
Yeah, for sure.
In the longer run.
Yeah. I can imagine that. I think so many good points, so many interesting things to think about. Because I'm just reflecting back on like
your
time.
own experience.
Yeah, you know what I mean, and the things I've learned now, moving like given where I am in my life right now and stuff. But it's very interesting to hear how you have to manage those conversations. I'm guessing. So you worked for 2 years first in the education sector, and then you did your own thing. So this aspect that we're talking about managing like expectations, building that relationship, how has that changed from when you first started to now? Because I'm guessing with all the experience you've had, you learn along the way.
Yeah, definitely. You get more. Obviously, the more experienced you get, the more confidence you have in what you're saying.
Of course, yeah,
and that's a big part of it, by the way, is being confident in your expertise.
Yeah,
and building the expertise, and then once you've built, that's why I'm grateful that I had obviously the 2 years of. If I'd done this from the beginning,
like flat out,
try to start with this from the start without having it, that would have really been. I mean, I would have been even harder than it was otherwise. Because at least when I started my business, I didn't really have to worry about the knowledge. I had the knowledge. It's about can I build up the client base? Can I get enough families on board? And I knew that if I spoke to them, generally they would see that I know what I'm talking about, and I would hopefully be able to have some success. Whereas if I had to think about that, and I'm also building up my knowledge of this, even though I would have had some credibility because I went to Cambridge and I applied and got into some great universities, blah blah, etc. Which obviously does give you credibility to some extent, but I wouldn't have had the confidence of what I was necessarily saying.
Yeah, fair.
And that would have probably come through, obviously. So I think early on, obviously, when I was working with students, obviously there is a learning curve, of course, and because I was part of a bigger company, I was able to lean on other counselors,
exactly, yeah,
and ask them questions, and we had some trainings, and I would shadow, and so I picked up the ropes through that, and of course ultimately you also have to learn a little bit through your own trial and error, your own experiences, and so I had that obviously on the job learning as well, and so by the time I started my own thing, I was definitely able to do the expectation management, and you know what to expect.
Yeah,
you'll still obviously get some curveballs here and there,
sure.
and new scenarios that come up, and you're always learning. But you've seen a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different student situations, family situations, and you become better at managing it, basically. So I think now, basically doing it for 5 years, 5+ years, I've definitely seen a lot of different scenarios and a lot of different situations. So, like with anything, you just get more and more comfortable, right? You build the expertise. And the expectation management is definitely always will be probably one of the bigger challenges with this job.
For sure.
And if you can get that sort of stuff right from the beginning, it makes a huge difference.
Makes everyone's life a lot easier.
Everyone.
Because they know what to expect, and you're not under promising you're not over delivering, under promising, you know what I mean? Like,
and it's like with any relationship, right? It's I think one of the hardest things often with any relationship building, personal or professional, is you have to, it's the transparency and the honesty. And sometimes it's not easy to do that because you don't want to hurt feelings, or you don't want to say, oh, sorry, you can't, that's out of reach for you, or look, we need to be a bit more realistic about that. But it all depends on where it's coming from. It's not coming from a place of you're trying to put someone down.
Exactly.
It's coming from a place of you're trying to actually help.
Exactly.
The student. And if people realize that you're doing it to help them, not to hinder them, then it's coming from a good place. Yeah. Then it's you keep that in mind, that philosophy in mind. It's easier to be honest and transparent. But that's something I have to remind myself of all the time, because sometimes you can have some slightly difficult conversations, which can be quite difficult conversations, and you have to have them if you want to get things in the right place.
You do, yeah. You can avoid as long as you want, but we need to address these.
To move
forward.
We can't ignore them. The earlier we address them,
the better.
The better for everyone.
Exactly.
Less pain, less heartache, and so it's like a lot of the times it's having those conversations frequently enough and early enough to be able to get everything on the table and be like, look, guys, this is what it is. Let's work with everything we have here, but let's understand what the situation is and what we're working with. And as long as everyone involved knows, is on the same page about that, then this is going to probably end up a lot better.
Yeah,
exactly.
For sure. When you were talking, so I was thinking, since your work is very relationship focused, like, it's that at the end of the day, besides your expertise and the advice, it's without that relationship, I could give you the best advice in the world, but if I don't have a good relationship with you, you're not going to take it and you're not going to listen to it, you're not going to appreciate it. So do you, from your side as well, do you also turn clients away if you feel that, because I'm guessing there's a discovery phase first before you decide if they want to work with you or you want to work with them? Because I can imagine in especially this kind of field, because it can be touchy, like, oh, they didn't get into this and you said this and that, like all that kind of shit. You can kind of gauge the kind of working relationship you're going to have with someone. So do you ever turn clients away if you think, you know what, I just don't think this is a good fit for me and I don't think I'm going to be able to help, or it's not because of lack of expertise, it's just from the relationship, it's just not going to be worth my time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that classic situation for any, business of, having the discipline to be able to work with people that you think you're going to have a fruitful relationship with.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think, to answer your question, have I turned families down? Yes, in the sense of there's some families where I feel like my expertise might not be exactly what they want or what they need, especially on the tutoring side. If they need a subject which is we don't really work with, or it's like an ad we could, but we don't really have great. I don't want to say, we can do that, and then and deliver it in a not, I want to be honest. These are areas of expertise, and I've happily referred them to other agencies and vice versa with some people that I know have referred me as well. If they work in, for example, the school sector and they go ask about universities. I know a guy who I know in the UK. He's referred me to. So it's just expertise, right? Basically. So I've turned families away in that sense, or turned them, more importantly, to other.
Yeah.
Try to
help
push
them
them in the right direction.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think sometimes what I'm wary of these days is, if a potential family client reaches out to me, or I reach out to a potential client, and I can, I don't like to, I'll have obviously, open conversations with them and let them know what we do and how we can help, but I won't push too hard. If I feel like, people often either they get it or they don't, either they want the help or they don't want the help. So once I've had, conversations and let them know exactly what we do, how we can help, and given them the information, it's up to them to do what they want with it, right?
So you don't have to, if you feel like you're having to oversell, it's probably not the right fit for you.
Exactly. Yeah. It's probably not the right fit between us. And they might have various reasons for, they may go with another provider, or they may just decide, we don't feel like we need the help. Fair enough, but as for me, it's a case of wanting to work with people who want to work with you.
Exactly.
Who are enthusiastic about working with you, and they don't feel any sort of regret or some sort of they're keen on working with you. So that's something which, again, with experience, working with more and more families, you kind of, going through those processes, you learn that, okay, I've done what I need to do. If they want to work with me, great. If not, then, all good.
It's all good. Yeah.
I remember I read a friend of mine works in property sales in the UK, in London. And I read one of his sales manuscripts one day, and it said, and there was a lot of things in that, it's 10 pages or something. It was full of information. But one of the things, their sales training, one of the things it said is it was called SW3, which is, it's a sales mantra, which is some will, some won't, so what, right?
Oh, I like
which
that.
Basically is some people will work with you, some people won't, and whatever the situation may be, whether they will or they won't. The important thing is whether they will or they won't. keep moving. So
Exactly,
what?
yeah.
Keep moving. And it's
Exactly.
like don't bask too much in the glory of your client wins. Don't bask too much in the disappointment of the clients that you don't end up working with, who you may have really hoped to work with. So, you know, all you can do is put yourself out there, and that's it. You know, if people want, if you're doing good work, that will usually speak for itself.
Yeah, exactly. And that will give you the credibility to open up, you know, other doors and stuff moving down the line. When it comes to applying for university now as a student, you mentioned something earlier that I didn't even think about, or I didn't know of, that you mentioned like, oh, for the US, you want like a narrative, you want a story, you want like a character. That's what finds them attractive. But in the UK, it's very like academic focused. It's more about
Degree-based.
Degree-based, exactly. So given your experience and what you see these days, at the end of the day, does academics reign king? Is that at the end of the day, no matter, I could have the best narrative, the best story, but if my grades are not up to par with what they're requiring, then I have no chance? Or is there actually like a balance? Or at the end of the day, listen, the grades they reign king, because that's step one, to even let them think about looking at you as a, in quotation marks, as a person.
So you're talking about for the UK, for example?
In general.
Anywhere.
In general. Or maybe it's different depending on the market.
Yeah, it is. It can be. It's different. I mean, so for the UK, for example, because you're applying for a specific degree in the UK, right?
Yeah.
Which is the case in most places apart from the US, which is we can talk about that in a bit. But the UK is degree based, so you're applying for a specific degree. Now the universities will publish the kind of minimum entry requirements, right? Which you may remember this if you apply to the UK. And they will state that, you know, you need to achieve a minimum of, or the standard, they'll say the standard offer is 3 A's at A level, for example, or an A star A at A level, or whatever, 40 in the IB with 666 in higher level. And they're quite specific often. And that standard offer is basically them telling you that if you're not there or more, there's a good chance you're going to get a straight rejection.
Okay.
Right? There are sometimes exceptions in terms of you may have a very specific situation, or you may have a very extenuating circumstances. They also have contextual offers, which are for maybe underrepresented minorities, for example, or people who have certain educational constraints, from their backgrounds. They tried to make it as fair a playing field as possible. Assuming you're at the kind of in the non-contextual or the standard offer area, then you're probably generally best advised to try and be at least at that level or more. Otherwise, you do run the risk of them just saying, listen. Especially the more competitive universities, we've got so many people applying.
Exactly. Yeah.
One of the easiest ways to just filter this is sorry, you don't make that. Well, I'm sorry, we're gonna, and they still have a lot more to look at.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you got to think to yourself, these people are going through thousands of applications. They're trying to make their life a little bit easier because it's not easy to go through and make these choices. So you are best advised to at least have at a minimum what they're asking for.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then you need to have a good reason for why you still
overcome that.
You can overcome that. Maybe it's a dream school. You're very close. Dream school, make it's worth it to try it. You're taking a risk. I had one student recently who wanted to apply to Imperial, and it was a close. He was basically like a point away from the IB requirement. They had a 40. He had a 39. They wanted a 40. He had a 39. And for him, it was, should he apply or not? It's his dream school. He really wanted to get in. He'd done some summer programs there, and I'd worked with him for a longer period of time. And so for him, it was, we thought it was worth him applying for Imperial. This is just recently.
Yeah.
So, how will it pan out? We'll see. But
good luck to him, whoever you are, bro.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's tough. So I think there are times when it's worth maybe going for it. But generally speaking, like I said, the safest advice is follow that closely and be careful with that stuff. And that again goes back to planning ahead and trying to, if you have certain university you're aiming for, try and get to that. These are the targets we need. Yeah, exactly. These are the targets you need.
Yeah.
And you know what you're going for. So that's the UK.
Sorry, just to interrupt,
Sure.
before we move on to the US, because this is something I've never understood, so maybe you can give me some clarity. why can I only apply to 5 universities in the UK? Why is that a thing? I don't understand it. In the States, I've like when
Unlimited,
I applied to, I
effectively.
think 30 schools.
Wow, yeah,
At
yeah.
the time, you know what I mean? And it's unlimited and there's so much more choice. And when I look at the different systems, like the English system is so rigid. Like I can't go into like start law and all of a sudden I'm like, you know what, actually I want to do finance, whatever. That I don't have that option. I can't just switch. I don't have, there's no flexibility there. So I've never understood why the system, well, let's one at a time. Why is it only 5 schools? Do you know why? And number two, why is it such a rigid system? Like there's no flexibility at all. And that's why the consequences of if it doesn't go well are much worse.
Yeah, the reason why in the UK, you have, I think, those limitations is to manage competition, right? Because if you're able to apply to way more universities, you're gonna have a lot more students applying to each university.
Yes.
Right. So you're more limited. So I think it's one of the main reasons why is because they are trying to keep the competition level a bit more reasonable, right? Especially for some of the more selective universities are obviously already at a very low acceptance rate.
Exactly, yeah.
So you're trying to, I think, make students think a little bit more carefully about where they really want to go to, and rather than just sending out superfluous.
Like a Unabomber approach, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's just gung ho, They're trying to make it a little bit more difficult for students to just go for whatever they're just, why not try that university? And it lets universities have a higher, what they call yield. aka, if I give you an offer, what are the chances you can actually accept the offer? Because they have to manage that.
Right?
Yeah,
and that's you have limited choices. Like if I take this, I might not necessarily get 2, 3, 4, or 5, right?
Yeah, well, if I give you an offer, and you make the offer, what are the chances you're actually still going to come here? Because maybe you'll go to another university, right? Maybe you've applied to the US. Maybe you've got another option in the UK that you prefer to us. Are you going to accept the offer in the first place? So there's all sorts of stuff where they have to manage that, and that's obviously a big challenge for them. It's a big admin burden. So they want to try and manage the yield, and that helps them manage the yield because you're being forced to apply to a smaller number of schools as well,
yeah.
right? So those are, I think, some of the driving reasons for why they keep it smaller.
Smaller, yeah.
Where in the US, you have you effectively can apply to pretty much unlimited,
Yeah.
right? Obviously, it's the constraint is how much time do you have and how well have you planned ahead. So most of my students will apply to, if they're applying to just the US, they'll probably apply to between 10 and 12 probably, because you want to make sure you have the good quality as well of applications. You don't want to just water down the quality because you just want loads, especially for the more selective universities. If they're doing dual track again, maybe they'll apply to like 8 or 10. They've also got the UK as well.
Exactly.
So and some students again will apply to more. If you've planned from early and you've got the bandwidth and you've got things ready early, maybe you'll apply to 15 plus in the US. The thing with the US is you have supplementary essays as well.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
Each. So you have the common
app, right?
Common app essay, which is the central essay, which is for all the universities. They're on which majority of them are on the common app. And in the UK, you have the UCAS personal statement. Yeah. But in the UK, it's a central application.
Yeah.
So you can, you pick your 5, you write your person, you can pick your 5. You don't have to do any extra work really for the 5 in terms of essay work. You may have interviews for Oxbridge or Imperial or LSE, but you're not going to have extra essay work to do. So for the US, you are what I guess their way of trying to prevent people from applying to too many is they give you that extra work to do often. Especially again, the more selective the university, generally the more supplementary essays they will have.
Yeah.
So and some of them can have some of them could have quite a few. They can have up to 3 to 5 extra essays.
That's a lot.
And each of them is 300-400 words, some of them. So it's still so there's work to be done, and you have to go through a drafting process if you want it to be good, and it can take some time. So imagine if you're applying to 10 universities, even 8 universities, even 6 universities, that's
extrapolate that,
and you've got quite a lot of essays to write on top. So you can be writing 15 to 20 essays, and again you can reuse and cut cut and kind of cut an essay because maybe it's a similar question.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's not like you're doing from fresh.
Fresh. Yeah.
It starts to become a case of you can start to use your existing material, but there is some work to be done. So you have to factor that in. So that's why I do think there's not a strict limit in the US, but it's almost like a self-imposed limit by giving you that extra work to do. Gotcha. If you want to apply to to our university, you've got to do these extra things.
Yeah.
But yeah, the UK system is it's always, I mean, it's been that way for a very long time. The maximum five options. You can't apply to more than five. You can only apply to one of Cambridge or Oxford. You can't apply to both.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so you can only apply to one of them. And again, I think it's trying to keep students from it's already very difficult to get into from putting too much risk
into
the application.
Yeah.
That's one of, I think, the driving reasons. So there are things that make it seem like it's more rigid or it's more strict. It's a bit less open. And of course, the UK system is degree based, and the US system is, generally speaking, it's liberal arts based. Right, so you go and you have 2 years generally where you're not. It's almost a continuation of school.
Yeah, you're not like in your major yet.
You're not in your major yet until your third and fourth year. So, and most students will, you have exceptions where you apply to architecture school, you apply to engineering school.
Yeah.
So there are exceptions as well, depending on your major. But generally speaking, most students will go to the College of Arts and Sciences, as they often call it, which is the liberal arts college of the university, and they will continue to explore.
Yeah, they'll navigate through that. Basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's a big question. Really, is what style is best for the student? Is a student the kind of student that knows they want? I want to be a doctor. In which case, you're probably better off going to the UK.
Yeah.
Or I want to be an engineer. Yeah, engineering actually, you can do that also in the US. You can go to a specific engineering school of university. But the point is that the UK gives you that, okay, I'm going to jump into this, and I'm super narrow now. Whereas with the US, it's like, okay, maybe I want to keep my options open. As a lot of young people, as we said, don't know what they want to do yet.
Exactly.
So it gives them more chance to take. Still need to do a foreign language, and you still need to do a math class, creative arts classes, and it just allows you to continue to explore.
Yeah.
And that might be very, very beneficial for some students.
Yeah.
So again, it's about being wary of the different systems and hopefully being open to, keeping your options open.
Yeah.
And maybe you want to try both. Maybe both sound good to you. And depends which schools you end up getting into that will dictate which one you go to. So these are one of the big philosophies I always I'm families is keep your options open.
Yeah.
Keep your options open. You never know which schools you're going to get into. Some of these schools are very hard to get into. I'm not gonna I don't lie to families and say I can guarantee you entry into this university, or I know this person, because it doesn't make a difference. Exactly. Any provider that tells you that or is charging astronomical amounts of money is lying to you. Basically, it's you saw that. I don't know if you watched that. Did you see that Netflix documentary, the Operation Varsity Blues, with the guy who was
no.
There was a whole scandal in the US a few years ago.
Because people were paying to get it's like bribery, right?
It was a whole scandal about a guy who used an approach which he called the side door, which is to get people in from the side door, which is the front door is the
admissions.
The kind of way that most people should be doing it, and then you have the back door, which is big donation givers who are, or specific people of in certain positions, maybe politicians, etc., who are who have the ability to go through the back door, which can be very costly. And then you have the side door approach. So the kind of point is, it's an interesting documentary actually. Very very fascinating. But the point is that you are effectively you're trying to make sure that you are applying to a wide enough range of universities, if you can, to give yourself the best chance to get into some great schools.
Exactly. Yeah.
And again, if you, I keep saying this, but if you plan ahead, a lot of families are like, it's a lot of, I heard it's a lot of work. I've got to do the SAT, or I've got to do all these essays. I'm like, well, yes, if you do it the day before, the 2 weeks before the application deadline, or even a month before. But if you plan a bit ahead, like with anything, and you give yourself some time, it's doable.
Yeah.
It's doable, and it's worthwhile to do it, because this is going to dictate your next, the students' next 3 to 4 years of their life, and then and beyond,
Yeah.
right? So, these are things that are worthwhile thinking about, and if you give it the time, then it's perfectly
Manageable.
perfectly manageable.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And I've had many students do dual track, UK and US, even
Does that seem
Canada.
the most common these days? Dual track? Is that the most common that it seems? Unless like you're in a British, I would assume if you're in a British system, there's a higher chance that you just apply to the UK. But if you're in an American system, I think dual track sounds more likely or more I would consider it more. I don't know.
Probably.
Maybe. I don't know.
Probably because the US is more work,
Yeah.
generally, it probably makes sense that US will probably be more able to will more easily be able to consider UK universities because there's a bit less work involved.
Exactly.
And versus the other way around. But it really does depend on the family. I mean, some families are very keen to keep the options open and want the student to consider, or the student themselves want to consider, both, because they realize there's a lot of great schools in both UK and the US. And some are more. The majority of families, families in general are probably going to be focused on one market.
More than
whether
the
it's
other.
whether it's just want to really apply to the UK or just want to apply to the US. You'll see that a lot, really. But there are, I'd say, probably more and more families that want to keep the options open and go dual track or even beyond dual track. Maybe they want to also apply to Europe, or also I had students who've applied to UK, US, Europe, and Canada. So they've done, that's quite a lot of universities at the end of it. But they've really spread the seed.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's some great universities in Europe. You've got some great universities. You've got some good universities in Italy, in Spain, in Netherlands. Canada's got some great universities. McGill, Toronto. BC, British Columbia. There's some good schools in Canada as well. So again, it's worth even thinking outside. UK and US is where the majority of the best universities in the world are.
Yeah.
US number one, and then UK. But there are also some other interesting options outside of that, which students, should probably be considering as well, assuming their families are happy for them to go.
Exactly.
So
it's very interesting listening to your explanation, understanding the different mindsets of both systems, because I've never looked at it from that way. I never knew there was how the UK is degree based and the States is kind of different, and there's a mindset behind that, and there's a way to think about it and the way to approach it that I've never even considered or knew about before. One thing I was thinking about, because you touched on it a couple minutes, many times just now, is keeping your options open, right? So now, let's say nothing is guaranteed, right?
No.
I'm come to you, I'm like, Talal, let's say I'm a parent. I'm like, I want my student to get into my kid to get into, let's say, a range of between these 5. I want him to get into one of these 5. Okay. Now, let's say he has the grades. Let's say he has a great story. Let's say he has everything's in line. But as you know, nothing is guaranteed. Competition is ridiculous. So how much is there an element of luck when it comes into this? And I know people sometimes when they say the word luck, it's like, oh, he got lucky. No, it's not about that. I had the opportunity to be lucky. It's like how some people get jobs that are like, I would have never thought I would have gotten that job. There's an element of luck, but from your perspective, as a parent looking at, for example, you, I'd be like, because you said everyone has a different definition of success. But for me as a parent that is working with you, my definition of success would be, oh, Talal helped my kid get into one of these universities that we really want to get into. But there's also an element of luck, right? So how do you... It's a tricky situation because that's just the reality.
That's just the reality, exactly. And again, expectations.
Yeah.
It's a case of, I'm very clear from the beginning. I there's no guarantees in this process. My job is to maximize the chances of you, of your son or daughter getting into a range of best fit universities. And that's very clear from the beginning. So that's the first thing, again, the expectation setting. Now, luck, they say that your I think it's something like you make your own luck, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, largely true. Now, I think there is an element of pure luck in the sense of maybe a certain admissions officer or tutor read your application and really resonated with it because he or she came from the same country as you, or is interested in certain things, or you talked about a book which they also knew about, and that's where the luck comes in. Right. So there is an element, 100%. But you are maximizing your chances of getting into these schools by, as you said, as we said before, getting the right academic profile, the right set of grades. Getting basically the best grades you can get. Writing a very strong personal statement that addresses and discusses a wide range of interesting activities that you've done, which are going to hopefully be unique, or tell an interesting story about yourself, or a personal essay for the US, for example, which is very interesting and very powerful. These things can make a big difference, and the recommendations that from you've got a great relationships with your teachers, and that's conveyed in the recommendations, and you've picked a smart selection of universities in the first place. You are maximizing your chances of getting a good outcome.
Yes.
And so, yes, there is an element of luck, of course, like with anything, there's always something, but it's all about maximizing what you can control.
Exactly, because there is an element that no matter what, is out of your control.
Is out of your control.
Exactly.
And it's like, let's do the best with what we can control, and let the chips fall where they may. So yes, fortunately or unfortunately, there is that element of luck, blind luck. But I think it's not huge.
Yeah. It's an element.
It's an element. Exactly. It's not a driving element. And I think the other things, supersede it basically. And so that's my, again, my job is to make sure that we're maximizing the stuff that we can control.
Exactly. Yeah. And
basically.
I think you made a good point. Is there's no guarantees in this game, in this world. Even when applying, not just for university, applying for a job, you could have exactly what they're looking for, great interview, whatever, and they still might pick someone out. But again, there is an element that you can't control, because another person's decision or perspective has a hand to play in this outcome for you.
For sure.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Their biases, their perspectives, may align better with someone else versus yours, not because you're not. And the thing is, I always try to make really drive home the point to my students who haven't got into universities. They're their top choice, for example, and most of them tend to get into, we have a good track record of getting students into one of their top 3 chosen universities. But if they don't get into, let's say, their top 1 or their top 2, because they're very competitive, and you have to remind people, especially young people, because I remember the feeling of not getting into, especially the first time I applied, as I told you. You can be super disheartened, super disappointed. Maybe you've worked pretty hard, and you've put in a lot of work, and you thought you're good enough and to get in. It's not about that, right? It's about, as they say, focus on. I always tell them, focus on the journey, not the end destination.
Okay.
Right? Focus on the journey, and that's, I think, if you can genuinely do that, super powerful philosophy to live by, right? If you can actually focus on the process of doing the work of, some of the most successful people, they say, really are able to do that.
Yeah.
They that's what keeps them going. Something doesn't go right, because I always tell students, listen, this is not the first or the last time this is going to happen.
Yeah, that's
right. But ultimately, can you look back at it and say to yourself, I gave this a good go? Because the only regret you should ever have is you didn't give it a good go.
Yeah,
you didn't think about it. You didn't put the effort in. You didn't really try.
Yeah.
Then that's generally when people feel bad.
Yeah.
Really, in their heart, that's when they feel bad.
Because
you always know.
Yeah.
You always, whether it's subconscious or subconsciously, you always know. But if you can tell yourself, I really did give it a good go and it didn't work out, generally speaking, you can be at peace with it. Yeah, easily be at peace. You're a bit disappointed. It's natural. It's a natural thing. Be fine. Process that feeling of disappointment, because it's fair enough. You really wanted to go there. It's a great university. You didn't get into it. Fine. But hopefully, first of all, there's other universities that you've gotten into, hopefully, which are also great universities, and you're going to have hopefully a great experience. They're a different experience, but a great experience. And again, make the most of that journey. Make the most of that experience. And so this is something to always I always try to remind my students is I think that's really important, because you can sometimes get really caught up in disappointment or elation. The other side of it's also true. Don't get too caught up in the because it's like, I'm in, and then it's like, okay, I just got into like Cambridge, or I just got into Harvard or Stanford. That's it. I'm sorted now. Well,
Yeah.
actually, hold on a sec.
We just started.
Once you get there, as I discovered with Cambridge, once you get there, you're like, okay, now they're real. Let the games actually begin.
Exactly.
Now it's really even at a tougher level. So, like I said, if you can really focus on that journey itself, everywhere you go, everything you do, that's all. That's the most important part.
Yeah, and I think I share that philosophy. I resonate with that a lot, and I just think this is where I struggle, or not where I struggle, what I putting myself in the mind of like a 17, 18-year-old is me and you at this point, we've gone through many experiences in our life and learned many things, many highs, many lows, many things we maybe took personally, whatever. So at this point, you saying to me as Khalid now at 31, like, oh, trust the journey, look back, no regrets, whatever. I'm like, hell yeah, bro, down. I know it. I felt it. I've been there. Cool. I agree with you. But when you're that age, to really internalize that and believe it and take it, that must be so challenging.
Definitely. I think it's challenging it's challenging at any age. But I think, again, just, reminders sometimes can be very powerful. I think reminders can be very powerful. You can often get, you can get tunnel vision with things. You get caught in that tunnel vision. I think even the most simple reminders can have a big impact. Especially when people are in that moment.
Yeah.
And they're in that trench, and it's like, this is like, this sucks.
This sucks, yeah.
And you can, someone to come to them and be like, rather than letting them stay in that trench, and be like, yeah, it really sucks, It's like, rather let's, help get them out of that and be like, listen, yes, it does suck, but, I'm here to tell you that you can dust yourself off and continue to move forward. This is really not as big a deal as you think it is. It's quite the opposite, actually.
Yeah.
Right? That's the thing. Just, and reminding people of that is, and because I've had that in my own life, I've gone through tough stuff. And,
of course. Yeah.
And when I had even as I said, in my first time applying, I had my disappointment. I had my brother around, for example. My older brother was very, very helpful in that time to help, keep me going, keep pushing me forward. My parents were quite disappointed, and of course, naturally, and my mom was like, I think, in a bit of a panic mode, and naturally, and my older brother was the stabilizing force that helped me push through it, really, and realize, I can just reapply again, and I can do next time I'll aim to really smash it, and I did smash. I smashed and I remember when I got the first acceptance to Stanford in the Christmas of the next year, when I was on my gap year, I remember I was with my mom, and I think I just had the Cambridge interview, and I hadn't gone off from Cambridge yet, but I remember I got the Stanford email, and we were in a hotel somewhere in London, and I opened the email, and I remember the feeling, of course, was something amazing, but because I'd pushed through the previous disappointment, and I'd gotten to that point, and and obviously it wasn't, forget getting into Stanford or whatever, it's that's the unimportant details. Really, the point is that I worked for it.
Yes, exactly. It's that validation, though.
So it's
validation of your work.
Effectively, yes. Exactly. Because at the end of the day, I really believe that this is like a vehicle to getting into a good university. This is a vehicle to push yourself.
Yes, exactly.
That's what don't focus on. Did I get into Harvard? Did I get into these are great universities? Yes, but don't put all your self-worth in that, because you're going to get disappointed, and you shouldn't do it anyway.
Yeah.
But, it was the feeling that I had of working hard to get to that point, and I knew how much work I put in and what I had to overcome to get there, that was really the great feeling. And when I reflected back on it, I was like, that's what it wasn't if I got into Stanford, it was the fact that what that meant, in terms of what I'd done to achieve it. And so, when I look back on it, I was like, I was able through good support system to focus on the journey and not get disappointed by what had happened initially and shut down and be like, oh, what's the point?
Exactly.
Why am I doing this?
For sure.
And that's how sometimes people feel, so from my own experiences, I know that it can make a big difference. I'm trying to also be that. I try to also be that support system for them.
For them, yeah.
And try to remind them of these things. And so, that can make a big difference.
Yeah. I can imagine so. I think getting that perspective from someone like yourself who's trying to guide them I think they would take that more than if it came from like a different area, because you can speak about your own experience, number one. And I like what you said. It's that, like, it wasn't about getting into Stanford. It's about 1 year ago, I wasn't successful. And this year, not only I've gotten into one, so already 10 times better than I was last year. It's validation of your work, but also I look at those kind of situations, like in my life, the times that it didn't work out and then it did. That's what shows me I'm like, oh, I've grown. Because I couldn't get there a year ago. I couldn't do that. The previous version of Khaled, so to speak.
Sure.
Only now can I do it with what I've learned and so on.
Yes.
We've touched on a lot of the student side and parents, whatever. But one thing I want to dive into before we round off for today is the area which I think people have the least amount of information or understanding, the universities. So the university angle. So we talked about students' perspectives. We've talked about parents' perspective. Now, let's talk about the university's perspective. So what's their mindset when it comes to this, like when it comes to picking students? There's the grades, fine. But it sounds like there's the way it works, it's a filtration system until it gets to a point that, okay, someone needs to take a look at this. Are there softwares now that, scan through stuff like that, like they do for companies and stuff? I genuinely don't know. I'm asking. So what's the university mindset that a lot of us or a lot of parents, a lot of students don't know that you think is very important for them to understand, like the mindset of the university when they're looking at like you as a candidate, for example?
Okay, so let's break it down between, again, I think it's useful to think about this from UK and versus US.
Okay.
So if we go UK first, so as we said, it's a degree-based approach, right?
Yeah.
So what the universities in the UK are looking for first and foremost is academic achievement. Academic achievement, particularly in subjects related to what you want to apply for.
Exactly.
So if you're applying for economics, how have you done in maths and economics? Maths is actually the most important for economics, as it is for a lot of STEM subjects. But, how have you done in those subjects, right? Have you taken further maths? That could help as well. Have you done extra math programs? So what's your academic level of achievement in school? And how have you supplemented that outside of school, right? Because the focus really of the personal statement, the UCAS personal statement is, why do you want to study this degree? And how have you demonstrated your desire to study this degree? What have you done? What have you done? And you can differentiate yourself by a lot of my students. I get them, to really do activities that show that. If you want to do economics, or if you want to do, for example, engineering, have you founded an engineering club in your school? Have you done an engineering summer program? Have you taken initiative to learn topics outside of school? Have you read certain books? How are you really demonstrating that passion? How are you really showing that enthusiasm? Because if you really want to differentiate yourself and really strive to push yourself, and thus get into the best universities, you have to do those things.
Yeah.
So that's what they're really looking for primarily in the UK, is that it's a very academic focus. Now, they also, so they'll look at let's say your academic transcript and your predicted grades and, how you're doing in high school. Then they'll look at your, that's like the base. That's like has to be there. You have to have a certain level of academic achievement,
that's the foundation,
right? The foundation, basically, right? And then we talked about, the extras that you're doing on top of that in terms of the different programs that you're doing. And that gets conveyed in the UK through the personal statement. So, you talk about, that's your opportunity to basically sell yourself effectively, right? Like, why am I suitable for this course? Why should you let me in for this course? So, you're able to really talk about this. So they're looking at the grade and the personal statement as your way of communicating
that
yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, and showing them what you're capable of from an academic perspective. And, you can talk about your extracurriculars, your hobbies and stuff as well, because they do want students who are well-rounded, who are interesting and well-rounded, have, hobbies in music or, whatever else they might be interested in, so there is space to talk about that as well. I do get my students to speak about that, but it's not the focus.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an extra, it's not the core. And then on top of that, what else they're looking at? What else they're looking at is the references, recommendation from the school, which is usually like a 4,000 character piece. which the school writes on so that's about, your teachers will write about you basically. How have you doing? What do you think of you as a student? How do you engage in class? Do you think you're suitable? How suitable do they think you are for a certain degree? So they'll really look at those references as well, right?
Yeah.
Alongside the personal statement. This person is your chance to sell, and the reference is them getting an objective perspective of you from your school, right? Which is untouched by you. And those components, your core academic performance, your personal statement, and your reference, those are really the key components they will be able to look at when they're determining whether or not they want to accept you for that course or not, right? Those are what you have at your disposal, basically, and you need to maximize how good those are, basically, right? And that's the way to look at it. For the US, there's a bit more nuance, I would say, and it's a bit less straight cut.
Yeah.
So for the US, first of all, the US doesn't have those minimum standard offer things I talked about with the UK before. Technically, you could apply to Harvard even if you had 3 Cs. Right?
Yeah.
And in the sense matter. Of it's like it doesn't. Not advisable.
Probably not.
Level.
Yeah.
It's not advisable, but you could. There's nothing anywhere that says you have to have this minimum or this is like what we expect from students. There's published data out there that shows the profiles of students who have gotten in, so you should be paying attention to that. But so first of all, there isn't that, but there is unofficially, right?
Yeah.
But that means you also have a lot more people applying because they feel like, I never see anything that says I have to get 3 A's or A stars, so why don't I give it a go anyway?
Yeah.
And that's why the acceptance rates are actually published acceptance rates are much lower at the top US universities than the top UK universities, because you do have a lot of people who one of the reasons you do have a lot of people who just apply because they think
let's give it a try.
Yeah,
Who knows?
Give it a try. Who knows exactly?
Yeah.
So in the US, they're looking at your similar in a way, but besides, they will look at your academic record as well. Of course. And again, you have to have if you're going for the best universities and the more selected ones, you have to have that at a certain level. Higher grades is always better. Again, an interesting course load because you're applying now for a liberal arts curriculum. So they're looking for an interesting course load. Are you taking, are you taking stuff in that's why IB, for example, is often seen as more favorable for US universities than A level.
Because you take more subjects.
You're taking more subjects. You're taking up to 6 subjects, right? And you have the theory of knowledge, whereas A level is often 3 subjects, right? Maybe 4 sometimes. But the point is it's more narrow because it's preparing you for that UK system, right? Whereas so IB is often seen more favorably by the US schools, the US universities. So so it's looking at that breadth of curriculum as well, especially if you're applying for liberal arts. And then you've got the SAT, ACT. That's another score, right? Which the UK doesn't require. And then they have, again, similarly, they have the essays. And remember, they have a Common App essay, which is a personal essay. You can write about anything you want, pretty much. It's about something personal to you that you think is powerful, that you want them to know about you.
Yeah.
So you can talk about anything, right? And that's, again, a challenge. What are you going to write about? So that's a piece of work in itself. But and then you've got the supplementary essays for a lot of universities. Again, the more selective ones. They've got that to look at as well. And that's painting an overall picture of you from a personal side. Yeah. That's your personal side.
Who are you? Yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah.
What's
your personality, right?
What's your personality? And that's what they're trying to work out, which they care about more than the US, the UK ones do, right?
Yeah.
They care about that angle more. The UK ones care about the academic angle more. So. And then again, you have your recommendations and your extracurricular activities that you've done as well. And again, recommendations are very important from your teachers and from your counselor usually. And so so that's again that's their they also have recommendations from that side. And that's what they will be looking at. There's sometimes we'll have interviews, alumni interviews as well.
It's the first time I've heard in my time, I never had interviews for any university that I applied to. But it seems like nowadays I'm hearing it a bit more.
So some universities will, some universities won't. But in the US, they'll do alumni interviews. So it's not like they're going to, like Cambridge or Oxford, they're going to drill you on can you differentiate 2x to the power of whatever 4, but it's not they're going to make you do really hard.
It's not technical.
It's not technical.
Yeah,
exactly. It's more like motivational and personality again. Just an extra data point for them to be able to work more work out more about you. So you'll sometimes have that too, and that can play a minor part, but it can influence obviously their decision. And that's how that process works. So it's
Gotcha.
similar in a way, but slightly different, and a
Yeah,
bit more
yeah.
holistic, I would say,
Yeah.
because of their curriculum system, really,
Yeah.
that liberal arts system. So that's what they're looking for. That's what they're looking at. So it is they're trying to look at a fairly complete picture of you to try and really work out whether you are the right fit or not. And that's what they have at their disposal. And they do have to just go through, like I said, there'll be some kind of automatic cuts probably by, do you have a certain, if, for the UK, for example, particularly, if your grades are below a certain level,
Easy cut.
basically. And then, then we're going to look in more detail at the remaining ones.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they've got to go through the process. And so, and you can imagine, I mean, put yourself in the shoes of them. I mean, it's not easy, you've got to go through and make these decisions. These two profiles might look really good. Which one am I going to pick? And you literally have those decisions to make.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it can be a hair's, and that's where the luck, maybe a bit of the luck does come in sometimes. And so, you've got to hopefully push yourself up as high as you can in the priority order,
One thing, I think my biggest takeaway personally from our conversation today is I never looked at it in such a, I guess, systematic way. And this, when I say that, I mean, whether it was looking at it from the student's perspective or from the university's perspective or parents, it's about like understanding what is the UK. Like, what is that system? How does it work? What are they looking for? And vice versa for the US. There isn't, I guess, from what I thought I would get from our conversation today is, this is the answer, and this like plays into like everything. But what I've learned is it is very specific to what you're looking for, what you're applying to, because that's going to dictate so much, so many things. And on the point you said about universities and acceptance rates and so on, it's an interesting dilemma because as a university, you make money from having students. But at the same time, I'm also like, I want you to come, but like maybe like not you guys. I want these kind of people. So it's a very interesting push-pull that they have to do as well from the university's perspective, because we want to attract students, we want the best, whatever, but you got to also give me a chance to get in, bro. You know what I mean? Like, so it's an interesting dilemma.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we say admissions is a minefield, right? I mean, it's
for sure.
And you've got to again control what you can control, and do the best with that, and that won't change.
Yeah.
You just have to position yourself as best as you can, do with what you're given, as best as you can, basically. But it's an interesting field. It's an interesting field.
Keeps you on your toes for sure, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, definitely keeps you on your toes. Keeps the students on keeps the parents on their toes. Keeps everyone on their toes. So it's never it's a pretty dynamic, interesting field to be in. A lot of things that pop up. So
it really does sound like it, man. Honestly, there's so much that I never even thought of or like knew, but like now, like so many like aha moments, even for me, and I have nothing to do with this, but still.
Well, we've all been through it, day, right?
That's the
most
thing.
Adults, we've all been through it.
Exactly.
So it's like you can always think back to yourself and
maybe that I should have.
So that's the interesting part. We've all been through it.
You have that. We have that reference point. Yeah,
have that reference point. Exactly.
Talal, I just have two more questions for you.
Sure.
These are questions I ask all my guests. So number one, looking back at, either personally or professionally, your career, university, whatever the case might be, if I ask you, what are you most proud of for yourself? What would you say?
What I'm most proud of in my whole...
For you. If I ask you that question, what comes to mind?
What am I most proud of? I would probably say taking the initiative to set up my own business.
Okay.
I think that's something which... it happened fairly organically for me, I guess, but it's, I think being able to really take your destiny into your own hands and do your own thing, be your own boss, and just take on that challenge, and still here today, and going through COVID and, the challenges of COVID, I think, that was something which I look back on and think I'm glad I did it. It's been quite a journey.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's in my career. I would say that's the thing which I'm happiest that I've done, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
to date.
and that makes a lot of sense, man. I resonate with that a lot. Like the work I do now, I do podcast consulting. So I help companies and brands launch their podcasts now. I've been doing this podcast now 2 years now. Wow.
Nice. Yeah, amazing.
And I never planned to be doing podcast consulting ever. It just kind of happened organically. One person asked me for it. I'm like, and they were like, "Oh, I want it for my company, whatever." I'm like, "Okay." And then another person asked another. I'm like, "Okay, I guess there's a business
There's
here."
something. That's how it happens, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was not planned, but alhamdulillah, hasn't been long, but we've had some good success. So hopefully,
Well, I can tell that you've done quite a few of these by the depth and intricacy of your questions. I think you've definitely. It seems like you're good at teasing out the right information from people. So
I appreciate that, man.
You've asked the right questions, definitely. So
I'm very humbled, and I really appreciate that. We put in a lot of work. I love doing this, bro. Like sitting down, having a conversation with someone. This is my favorite thing to do in the world, and especially if it's a topic I don't know about. I'm just curious as fuck.
Yeah,
we had to swear at the end, but it's fine.
We can do the bleep now.
Yeah. And for my last question, Talal, what is the message you'd like everyone to take home with them today?
The message I'd like them to take home with me today is, I think we've talked about a few messages, right?
For sure. What stands out to you, though?
I think it's the message of focus on the journey, not the ultimate outcome that we spoke about before. I think that's really a philosophy that, if you can properly execute that in your life, I feel like it will take you far.
Yeah.
It will really take you far. And if you can, genuinely embody that, and that's the challenge. If you can genuinely embody that, then that will reap rewards in anything that you do.
100%.
So I think that's a good message, hopefully.
I think that's a fantastic message, man. And I really like what you said. The word you used, embody it, because there's taking it on, there's understanding it, there's believing it, but then living it is a completely different story. So, but obviously it is a process. It's a process
Exactly.
about the process. So it's just the way it is.
Exactly, 100%.
Talal, man, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show today, man. This has been a fantastic conversation. I've learned so much, bro. I knew nothing about any of this. So even my mind, completely blown.
Thank you very much.
What is where can people find you if they want to work with you, connect with you? Let us know.
Yeah. So this is the plug, right?
Yeah, of course. Part. Yeah, I got a plug.
My business is called Integra Education. You can find us online at www.integraeducation.net. Link in the description.
Yes.
So all of our information's on there, services that we offer that we've discussed, and how you can get in touch with us, testimonials, and very specific information. So that's the main place where people can easily find us, basically. Awesome. And happy to always talk to people and have conversations and discuss things.
Yeah, for sure, man.
So. Yeah, thanks a lot, Khaled. I really appreciate it.
No, man, it's been a pleasure. Guys, you heard it. If you want to get in touch with Talal, if you're a parent, if you're a brother, if you're a sister, whatever, you want to look at universities, you want any information that has to do with universities, Talal's your guy.
Please get in touch.
Yes, please get in touch at integraeducation.net. Guys, as always, thank you so much for listening. Talal, thanks again. I really appreciate it. And as always, hope it helps. Peace.